This training module, I'm going to show you how to use the Innovation Disclosure Forms, or IDFs, to capture the first documentation of your innovation. This includes documenting the basics and the details of your innovation, as well as many of the surrounding facts that will be useful throughout the patent process. By the end of this training module, you should be able to fill out your own innovation disclosure form for your invention, and if you want, use that as the basis for filing a provisional patent application today. Let's get started. Before we go and look at a sample of the innovation disclosure form that I use, I want to talk a little bit about the idea of filtering. Filtering is a concept that I was introduced to when I met Jeff Pugh, a local painter, when he was painting one day in an art gallery in Park City, Utah. Jeff is actually a friend of one of my law school classmates, Nate. And Nate was explaining to me one day how he had purchased or commissioned a piece of art from Jeff Pugh. So I was excited to run into Jeff later at the art gallery and get a chance to talk to him. And I actually like his artwork too. He was explaining to me his process of using filters to work through his abstraction of a scene that he wants to paint. So he might use 1, 2, 4, 5, 6 filters to come up with his concept of what the painting should look like based on the scenery that he wants to paint. And he explained this a little bit on one of the websites where his artwork is listed and available for sale. You can read this on the screen, his idea of filters and abstraction, but I think that the application here to your invention is that what we're trying to do in the patent process to a degree is take the invention that you've conceptualized in your mind and get that down eventually into a format that people would expect to see in the patent process. In the meantime, we're going to work through some filters, some ways that we can look at your invention from different perspectives so that we can broaden the scope of protection you might get, strengthen the description that you might provide, and overall make your patent process more valuable as you move forward. Just think about the way that Jeff might use filters to take, for example, a picture of a scene and then turn that into a printed version from his computer, or maybe alter it a little bit in Photoshop or sketch it out. But in any case, going through a series of filters to get it to the point where he's comfortable painting and releasing it to the public. So the innovation disclosure form is your first opportunity to filter your invention. And we're not thinking about filtering in terms of out or like editing a draft of a document. That's not the case at all. We're just trying to think of filtering in terms of taking it from what you envision in your mind, or maybe even perhaps what you've built in a prototype, and putting it into a documented form. And so the innovation disclosure form is going to help us do that. Okay, we're now going to go ahead and look at the innovation disclosure form and how to fill that out. So I've got a blank form here. It's got a lot of instructions on it, and we're going to just step through these one by one. And remember, once we get done with this form, you should be able to take this form and the information you provided on it, and if you want, file it as your own provisional patent application. Now, there are a lot of ways that we can make this better after you've filled out this form, but if you're in a time crunch or if you want to get something filed quickly for any other reason, you can do that using this form and then the filing instructions that we'll go over separately. Let's get started. On this first page here at the top, simply enter the date and list the names of the people who you think should be listed as inventors. This isn't final yet because we can't determine inventorship properly until we've got the provisional application fully drafted. However, if you're going to file a provisional patent application based on this document by itself, then you should be able to finalize the inventorship based on who contributed to the conception of the invention that's described in this document by itself. For the title, just put in a simple title. It just needs to say something descriptive about your invention. It might be, for example, a tool for children to make their beds in the morning, or a software processing module for a computer to process incoming graphics more quickly, or perhaps a new type of handle for a hammer. The title is not critical at this point, but it's good to have something for the initial draft. The brief description or idea of your invention is a place where you can list 3 or 4 or 5 sentences to briefly describe your invention at a very high level. You don't need to include details at this point. Just include enough information that somebody will be able to have a general idea of the type of technology or the operations you anticipate implementing in your invention. This is more of a roadmap rather than a detailed description. For the drawings, if you have some drawings or photographs that you've already created, you can just paste those into this document. Or, if it's easier, just simply add them on separate pages after this document. You don't need nice formal drawings at this point. Any photographs or hand sketches that you've already produced will be just fine. You'll see some examples in the sample that we're going to go over later. The next section is the detailed description. This text box for the detailed description is deceivingly small. You might find that you put in a half a page or 5 pages or more into this section, just talking about what your invention is. It really depends on the details of your invention and how complicated it is to communicate what is new with your invention. I don't want you to go into detail here about the different nuts and bolts and adhesives and structures that are commonplace within your invention. I only want you to focus on those things that are critical to the advantages that you're providing compared with conventional technology. For example, if you're taking 2 separate pieces that are well known and have been around for 50 years, don't go into detail describing those individual pieces. Rather, spend your time describing what happens when you put them together in a new way and what advantages come from that combination. That's where you want to describe the details of your invention. Think of it in terms of describing your invention to an impatient teenager. If you start describing all of the bits and pieces they already know, they're not going to listen very long, and they're going to tune you out. At least my teenage kids would tune me out if I tried to go into that level of detail. But if you start telling them that, for example, we start with parts A and B that you already are familiar with, and this is what we're doing differently, and you quickly get into what is different and new, you'll be able to keep their attention. This will be a better use of your time to effectively focus on the parts of your invention that are new, as opposed to the parts of your invention that everybody already knows about. The next sections are not required for your patent application filing, but they can be extremely useful to document now when it's all fresh in your mind, as opposed to trying to remember it or recreate it down the road once you decide to file a non-provisional patent application. What you're going to do is put a little more elaborate explanation as to the background of your invention. This can include things like how you came up with it, what was the problem you ran into that made you think you should find a solution, or what was the process you went through to come to a solution. What you don't need to focus on here are the individual references or patent applications or patents or white papers or documents that you're aware of. You don't need to list those in this section. In fact, I would recommend not listing them. You will want to be aware of them, and you'll keep in mind the problems that they're solving and the way that they've discovered those problems. But for now, what you want to focus on is simply the fact that there is a problem that you recognized, and that recognizing the problem is why you came up with the solution you came up with. You don't need to talk about the other solutions in great detail at this point. In other words, focus on what problems other people have tried to solve rather than the solutions that they have used to solve the problem. Focus also on why they didn't solve those problems very well. What problems still exist even after somebody might use a solution from a prior inventor. Or you could even focus on the problems that prior inventors don't even anticipate because perhaps they're new problems. Also, you might focus on what gaps in the technology, in the scientific understanding exist at this point in time, and why those gaps would make it difficult or maybe even impossible for somebody else to recognize the problems because the technology wasn't even there to identify the problems in the first place. Next, talk about how your invention improves current processes or systems or devices. What is it that your invention is doing to make somebody else's job easier or better or faster? Again, this can be very brief. For example, you simply might say it speeds up the processing time for certain calculations, or it improves handling in a user's operation, Or a user can hold it easier or hold it longer. Or for clothing, they might be able to wear it in a different way that facilitates enhanced safety or facilitates some type of health benefit. Just list whatever improvements over the existing technology you think your invention is achieving. For the alternative embodiments, you should focus on the different ways that you make your invention. In contrast, for the competitive implementations, focus on the ways that a competitor, once they find out about your invention, might try to change their processes to get around your invention. The emphasis of both the alternative embodiments and competitive implementation sections is to give, again just briefly, some thought to the types of things that you might do to make different versions, or the types of things a competitor might do to try to avoid your patent rights in the future.